Welcome to the MHP Exchange, where the riches are in the niches. We'll show you how to invest your way into mobile home parks with real strategies, tips, and behind-the-scenes know-how to grow your cash flow. Stick around. This is where smart investing begins.
So every operator, when they look at a deal coming through, there's always one line item that gets overlooked until the end, but without paying careful attention to it, it could absolutely kill your deal and change the metrics of what you're looking at. And there's ways around it, but it is a cost that is a silent deal killer in everyone's deal, regardless of asset class. And we're going to talk and do a deep dive on insurance right now, which is probably everybody's cringe word in this industry. And we're going to talk with two experts in the space. I got Dillon, Kirby, and Todd Piersol from Tartan. And we're going to talk about ways that, what they're seeing in the marketplace, how this is impacting deals, and maybe some tips for everybody listening on how to structure your deal or work on, some of the policies to save some money and create better returns. So, gentlemen, thank you for joining us on the MHP Exchange podcast. How are you today?
Frank, thank you. We're very blessed to join you for the conversation today, and appreciate you carving out some time to talk about something that you hit the nail on the head with, a major pain point. So maybe we start out with just giving a brief background on Todd and myself and how we kind of ended up as manufactured housing insurance experts, I guess, self-proclaimed. But again, thank you, Frank, for having us on today. Starting out, just a brief background, and Todd, I'll let you jump in and give a little story on what brought you here. But insurance has been something that I've been involved with really since I graduated college. Started out in the employee benefits space for a few years, and then I was lucky enough to get over into the manufactured housing industry with CoverTree. So CoverTree was really kind of my first exposure into manufactured housing and the complexities and the nuances that go along with it. After spending a brief stint with CoverTree, really focused around resident programs, we realized a pretty dire need on the commercial side for operators themselves that are managing portfolios, et cetera. And Todd and I were lucky enough to get joined up and realize that this is an industry that we wanted to try to disrupt in a favorable way. And we felt like we had a lot of the tools and resources and things that put us in position to do so. So kind of, again, my quick and dirty stint into how I got into manufactured housing and partnered up with Todd. And I'll let him give his brief background on his experience as well.
Very brief, because I'm sure the audience wants to hear more about how this is going to impact them and some tips and tricks. But yeah, I spent 16, 17 years in various positions with a large publicly traded broker in a variety of industries, but primarily property and casualty for real estate, manufacturers, you name it. And fortunately, after Tartan was launched, was very early on introduced to Dillon. And we both identified, he had already identified, and together we said, there's a real need for specific attention to the insurance needs of manufactured housing community owners and operators. There didn't seem to be a lot of attention to it. There was not a lot of new blood in that field from an underwriting standpoint or from a broker representation standpoint. And we just felt like also the industry itself doing really well and such a vital need for our country. And so we just said, man, this is a place for us to really sink our teeth into. Dillon had already been in that space, and the response from the market and some of the things we'll talk about here shortly is the reason why has been very good. And so we think we're really onto something.
Yeah, you are, because there's very few real specialists in this sector of the marketplace. And here's where this becomes really important, especially if you're looking at a deal. Most of the times when you're acquiring a property from maybe a local operator, they've probably got their local insurance broker who's put a policy on that community. And most of the time, and you'll see that in the pitch decks that are sent to you, it's a basic G&L policy, general liability trip and fall if somebody gets hurt. Doesn't cover the homes, doesn't cover business interruption, doesn't cover, depending on your area, wind and hail. There's so many things that are not covered. And you have this basic policy that it's important to have, but really doesn't run the gamut. And if you're out there and if you've got, for instance, if you have investor capital and you don't have business interruption insurance, I mean, you're swimming blind, right? Or you're flying blind. But Dillon, what made you, I mean, you said obviously you had a look at it with Coventry, but you kind of you dove a little deeper on the commercial side. Like, what did you see as, hey, this is what people are missing, and this is where we can really create some value?
Yeah, that's a great question, Frank. I think the biggest thing to keep in mind is us in this industry realize to an extent that it sits on an island of its own a little bit, right? When you look at, maybe some of the financial companies that play in the space and the lending companies, insurance companies, that manufactured housing does tend to sit a little bit on an island of its own. So during my time at Coventry, when I was helping operators, kind of take a look at the risk profile from the ground up, we started to identify some gaps and some holes. And I really put it into two buckets. I put it into one bucket, which is just an antiquated feel. So I think historically, insurance around growing MHC portfolios has really fallen into an antiquated trench of, let's just make it easy. Let's slap a GL policy on there that makes the lender happy and checks their boxes and keeps it moving. And when you have companies like these new lenders and these new insurance companies come in, starts to shine a light on areas that, have been held in darkness for a while. And that's what really started to kind of put the light bulbs off is, we started to look at operators that were taking a modern approach to getting residents insured, giving them more options for insurance while they were living in their communities. And then we started to see some of the levers that would pull on the commercial side. So a better insured resident force means a better risk profile for the operator itself. When we were starting to try to tie all of these things together, I realized that there wasn't really a brokerage in the space that was trying to connect all of the dots. So programs that were designed for residents, programs that were designed for the operators of the communities. How can we blend all of those together and make sure that everybody wins? And I think that's what really fueled the charge up front was, hey, this industry is growing at an exponential pace, and you have new players that are coming in and they're improving the ways that we're doing a lot of things in the industry, but the insurance is still kind of stuck in 1990. So that was really the trigger was, hey, I think that there is a way to take a modern approach to this business. I think there's a way to blend the tech savviness of operators that are coming in and growing their portfolios and bring a new narrative to the commercial insurance side. Not the same old, hey, we have a manufactured housing community that we're acquiring, we need GL, and we got a set of park-owned homes. It's really changing, I think, the stigma like the industry has been working so hard to do, but doing it to the insurance carriers and getting them excited about this risk in a new way.
So and I just want to ask this, and I want to make sure I heard this correctly. Are you saying that if I have a park and those residents have their own insurance on their homes, that my policy may be less because the park owner, the owners of those homes are insured, right?
That's exactly what I'm saying. Yeah. And to break it down in the simplest terms, Frank, you could have two communities that are identical, sitting side by side, same number of pads, same number of park owned homes, same risk. If community A has 20% of their residents insured and community B has 50% of their residents insured, that's a drastically different risk profile to the commercial insurance carriers. Naturally, they have a 30% higher chance that a claim would fall on a resident's policy versus immediately going over to the operator's policy. So you have this mitigation buffer built in when you have a more intact resident program, when you have better communication around that. And again, the end goal is to shift some of that exposure from the operator over to the tenant. Now, the glaring light is that majority of operators already have an insurance requirement embedded in their lease. Most of them already know that this is important. If you're living in my community as a resident, you need to have liability insurance. The difficult part comes to managing that process, tracking that data, and then making sure that you get an ROI from that. And I feel like that's something that unique that we do at Tartan by blending all of those together and again, trying to make it win-win-win for all. It's better if residents have insurance, and it's better for the operator if more of their tenants are insured.
So I'm sorry, Todd.
Well, I was just going to jump in, and I think if you even scope out a little bit more, what we're looking at is we're seeing, all right, a lot of operators may look at this as saying, all right, this is a line item, like you mentioned earlier. I'm going to acquire this community, or I'm running these communities. I need to make sure that fits into my budget in this one isolated bucket. And we're trying to scope out and say, hey, listen, insurance doesn't have to be a necessary evil. It can actually be a tool for you. If you have an advisor that understands the risk profile, that can carry that message to the underwriting community, you're going to get better deals. You're going to get better terms and conditions. That is actually a weapon for you. If you can consolidate portfolios, I'll tell you something we see quite a bit. We'll see an operator that has, say, 20 communities, and they've acquired them over a course of 5 years, however many years. And they wake up one day and they have 12 different effective dates. They have 9 different insurance companies on the portfolio. They're spreading this volume out over all these little buckets. And nobody has gone to them and said, hey, how about you look at this universally? Why don't we get a little economies of scale here? Why don't we take your heft and leverage that against the insurance community and get better terms, keep Fannie and Freddie and all these lender requirements. We've got that covered, but let's look deeper at that. What is the risk profile of your portfolio? As DK said, do you have a highly insured resident population so that the first $50,000, $100,000 of any liability claim may actually go through them first? Let's take that back to the underwriter. What is your CapEx? What are you spending in these communities? Let's take that message back to the underwriters and explain to them that, I hate to use this term, but these are not trailer parks. This is not what you see on TV or what's embedded in some people's biased mind about what's going on. These are communities that are well run, well operated, and should be treated as such from the underwriting community. So scoping out, it is a holistic look at the real estate investment that happens to be in MHC. And that's where I think some operators historically, it just hasn't been presented to them. They're moving fast. There's a lot going on. We think that there's an opportunity to come in and take that load off and say, this could be a tool for you. Every dollar we save, you're getting to put into your ROI at some point. Every uninsured claim that is actually covered because we're getting better terms and conditions, that's not coming out of your budget. So it's we're sort of weaponizing the volume and making sure that this is a tool, not a pain point.
Those are some really, and I will tell you, it's from an operator's perspective to start off with. Sometimes when you're in an acquisition mode, you're absolutely correct. You're moving, and the thought isn't, hey, how do I put this on, kind of a blanket policy to leverage that? It's all right. I need the policy to close, and then it's done, and then you move on. And it's, it takes a extra thought to go back and say, all right, now let me review that again. And you typically won't do that until that policy is going to renew. So taking that time to manage those insurances is so, especially as you scale, right, becomes very, very critical. But on the resident portion, are you tracking it, or you have the community tracking? Because to your point, yes, there are in community rules, you have to be insured. Is it renter's insurance if it's a park-owned home, or are you just focused on people who own their homes and saying, hey, we're going to make sure that they have the GL, and then we're going to bring that back to the carrier?
Yeah, so exactly that. Unfortunately or fortunately, you can't, operating a community, you can't force someone to insure a home that they own. You can't force them to put property coverage on a home that they own, unless obviously the operator's acting as a servicer or lender requirements. But this part of the discussion is really focused around liability, and that's applicable whether the tenant owns their home or whether they're renting that home from the operator. And again, we typically, very rarely, Frank, do we stumble across a lease or a lease addendum that doesn't have some type of requirement around liability language, right? Those are the coverages that protect against slip and falls and dog bites and things like that. Now, the premise behind this is that we want to articulate our clients that operate portfolios as doing it the right way, right? So it's not always a matter of, hey, can we sit here and do you have the clean report that shows 80% of your tenants are insured? Obviously, that would be beautiful to get from all of our operators, but we know tracking data, things like that can be difficult. Just having a real attention to this, we see, can put operators in a bucket of their own. As crazy as that sounds, an operator just at least being cognizant of their lease language and making sure that community managers are articulating that with new residents, are explaining insurance requirements to new tenants as they're moving in. If you have a sound process just around communication, that alone would put you in kind of a heightened, a more preferred risk category. If you take it one step further and you're actually implementing some kind of tenant reporting program, that would put you in a definite preferred risk program. Now, back to your question, there are companies that will do this for operators. There's a few companies out there. Again, I helped work for one of them. Covertree is the name. There's a few other ones though. And they'll come in and they'll say, hey, we will help implement a tenant liability program is basically what it's worded as in the industry. But what that means is most of the time, most of these carriers will front load all of your tenant information, and they'll deploy communication strategies and programs to either field proof of insurance from tenants or give them an opportunity to purchase insurance if they don't have it on their own. When the end of that communication segment or engagement period is done, you're then sitting there with a pretty strong bird's eye view. Who has insurance and who doesn't have insurance? We have operators that take it one step further and they will force tenants to have insurance and they'll add it to their rent each month. But again, just what we've seen is the carriers and the markets are used to operators doing nothing. They're used to operators having no pulse on tenants' insurance status, no real record keeping, no real data tracking. So every bit of an improvement is significant on this side right now. And that's where we work with our operator clients, is saying, hey, we don't have to come in year one and drastically change the way that you're doing all this. But if we take baby steps and we look for a 2-3 year, runway, that's how we're going to best position your portfolio. That's how we're going to tap into the most preferred cost. That's how we're going to get the most robust coverages. And if we're taking steps periodically to improve the risk profile, you will eventually get to a spot. And we've seen our clients climb that spot of getting into a bucket where carriers are then fighting over the insurance, fighting over who gets to quote the portfolio, because they know how well run it is and they know how strong their risk mitigation strategies are. So that's our goal, is to try to coach our MHC clients and leverage tools that they already have in action and just articulate that the right way to the market. And to Todd's point earlier, sometimes that's just where the ball has been dropped, where the carrier doesn't even know that maybe the client has a forced place tenant program in, but again, that's where it's on guys like me and Todd to articulate that accurately and emphasize on the strategies that you operators are doing to mitigate that risk. And the tenant program is a big one that you can put in.
That's a huge, that could be a huge savings, because as any operator looks at it, I look at when I look at my T12 across the board, the insurance cost is somewhere between 3 and 4 of the highest costs I have there, right? And in some cases, it's the second highest cost in each community is the insurance coverage. And here's the frustrating thing, and from an operator's perspective. Now, I've been in this space 13 years. I've had one claim, right? Where we had a weather event that impacted, and this was almost a decade ago. So we had one claim and it was paid off. We had an issue recently within the last, over 12 months, but recently, where we had impact. Now we've had other smaller incidents where you're like, all right, it's de minimis, 10,000, 15,000, it's not worth a claim, right? Not worth the energy, effort, and the potential premium adjustment on that. But it was enough of a claim where it was impactful. We knew the business was going to come back, like the people were going to come back, but things were shut down. There was some weather damage. We were rehabbing some homes. We had some utilities that infrastructure that had to be replaced. We're ready to make the claim, and our broker said, well, you can make this claim, but I'm just going to tell you what's going to happen, because our policy, it happened in October. Our policy was renewing in January. He goes, they're probably going to drop you. And then once you're knowing that they dropped you, your premium's going to go up. It's like, so the question for us was, well, what's the point of having the insurance if that's going to be the response, right? Is that a typical response or pain point that you hear from other operators? And then what can you do to mitigate that? Because the frustration for us at that point was, well, we've been paying for, 5 years. Here's our opportunity to get some of that back. And it was essentially we were recommended to not even go down that road.
Yep.
I'll let TP handle this one. Yeah.
Thanks. I get the claims one. Those are always fun.
It's his fastball. I know
it is. It's a dynamic, not just in MHC. It's all across the board. It goes all the way down to personal homeowners and auto insurance. Do you file a claim or do you not file a claim? And it's a frustration point. And there's a couple things I think that we can do proactively to address that. One is your deductible structure. I mean, if you're going to pay a small claim, then within the parameters of lender requirements, obviously, and there's other levers there, let's put a deductible that's going to be at or above where you think, I'm going to be comfortable paying this. I'm not going to want to submit it to insurance anyway. Well, you might as well get a little bit of a premium credit for taking on that risk. So you don't want to see yourself with $1,000 deductible, but you're paying claims up to $5,000. You're missing something there. Carrier relationships, and that's where having a specialist in MHC in this case is critical, so that there are options out there. If you're going to have an insurance company say, I'm going to drop you after filing a claim and you haven't filed in multiple years, one, I think that's egregious, but also two, there better be other options, and you need to know the insurance space so you can say, hey, we can pivot right over here to these guys and get the competition going again. And I think it also comes down to, as most things in life do, is communication. If an insurance company is just getting a claim submitted to them, they don't know the background, they don't know the story, they have not been told the complete story about the operator themselves, then they're going to treat it however they want to. And underwriters are inherently scared. They're paid to be scared. They're paid to think about the worst case scenario and to say, hey, this happened once. Is this a trend? Is this going to keep happening? Let's get off this risk. Part of our job is to be proactively letting them know what kind of operator we're dealing with. Claims are going to happen, but they're doing all these things right in the risk profile. They have a tenant liability program. This is their CapEx and maintenance schedule. So they're doing things proactively to make sure the community's safe and that it's as risk-proof as possible. This is the claim that happened. It's a shock loss. It's going to happen, or here's what they're doing to mitigate it ever happening again. So I think communication really boils down to the key. It's going to get you the better deal on the front end. And when you get into a ditch where you have multiple claims or you have a significant claim, it will keep the tires on the track. And it's an ongoing discussion. I mean, we want our underwriters and multiple underwriters to understand the risk that they're getting on and the operator themselves. And I think that gets us and you in a better position to weather any of these storms. I like having conversations with the underwriters. We do not like to say, absorb all these losses yourself, because you might see a 20% increase in your insurance. We want to be proactive. We think you should be able to file claims. When you start getting into frequency, that's when it becomes an issue. But if you're having a claim every couple of years, or even a couple claims a year that are smaller, that should not completely disrupt your entire insurance program.
And I think a lot of that ties back, Frank, just real quick, to what we were speaking about earlier, and the tee up is so key, right? Again, because to Todd's point, claims are going to happen. We would never want, it would really bother me if, and I'm sure some of our clients have this thought come in and out, but at the end of the day, you should feel like you have that safety net there when you need it. That's the entire purpose of insurance, right? Is when something goes wrong, you've been paying the premiums and you have the coverage there when it's time to use it. I think the claims component can really even be tied back up to like that front end conversation. And with the degree that, we are selling this risk to the insurance marketers, to the markets, and the degree of data and reporting and information that we're sharing, we leverage that a lot of times, further on in the relationship. So say we have a claim pop in 6 months from now, we'll go back and leverage a lot of those things that we use to get the deal done in the first place, which is, hey, just as a reminder, like Todd said, this is a high quality operator. This is a 3, 4, 5-star community operator. They've had one other claim in the last 3 years. It was a dog bite. And again, communicating at the time of claim is equally as important as communication through anything else. I'll actually use an example here because we find sometimes we can turn these claim situations, as much as they hurt, we can find positives in one way or another. But we had a client, a prospect, late last year that had a dog bite situation, Frank, and it was a larger claim. It was about $100,000 dog bite claim, and the carrier did exactly what you alluded to a few minutes ago. They came in and said, okay, we're going to pay this claim and we're non-renewing you in 30 days when your policy expires. Obviously, operator lenders are panicking. The broker draped the market trying to find options. And when we got introduced, we spent a full hour just understanding what they do from an internal standpoint to mitigate risk. And we found out that, it was an older grandfathered lease that they were using at this community, and it didn't have their current restrictive language around certain dog breeds and things like that. So we leverage the rest of their portfolio and how high quality that's being run and the steps that they take and how this community was a newer acquisition. It slipped through. And we were able to, again, kind of tie everything together and find coverage for that community with no penalties. We actually lowered the cost for that community than where they were paying while they were insured. So I just use that long-winded story to say, the story is so important, and working with a broker who understands the nuances of MHC. I know you mentioned this earlier, Frank, but a lot of times you'll see like a commercial real estate, they'll blend MHC and MHC is really quite different from a lot of our other commercial real estate. So communication is key. Todd and I emphasize on that big time. But if you can find the right levers, most times you can tell the story that the market needs to hear if they trust you. And I think that's what it comes down to a lot too.
So, and what I'm hearing here, which I think is real, a difference. And I think the challenge for most operators is they feel that they're being judged or their premiums are looked at on perceived risk, not necessarily on their operational risk. Right. And it's in making sure that story is being told effectively, right? That makes the carrier feel better rather than just say, hey, this is, Pine Oaks community,
right?
That's an insurance rate. And now they're just looking at it as, here's a community, here's the area, here's the region, here's the quote unquote perceived risk that we're getting based on what's in that. And you're getting a generic view.
Yeah, I mean, we're saying, hey, this is Frank Rizzo, 13-year MHC extraordinaire, looking at adding a new community to his portfolio. He's been doing it, this is the way the rest of his portfolio has been performing. And these are the strategies that they've used to be successful in other communities and drive investment back into those. And, that's part of that is kind of how we articulate when the shoe fits there too. So yeah, you're exactly right.
And to add even more onto that, Frank, our responsibility is obviously partly to tell the story, to sell the operator to the underwriting community. We feel like our responsibility, and something we have been actively doing, is selling the overall industry's story to new underwriting companies who heretofore have shunned and said, hey, we're not going to write. We don't want to write MHC. It's not a good risk profile. We beg to differ. We see a lot of communities, and the loss ratios that we're seeing are more akin to what you talked about, where it's in the low single digits if you look at a 10-year loss to premium paid. And our job is also to sell that and bring new underwriting capacity to the industry. And again, that puts downward pressure on premiums, obviously, more supply. And so we have been successful in certain areas of getting underwriting companies to say, hey, we're not ready to bite it all off, but we'll start writing excess liability for you. And we're seeing the rates go down because now it's not just one or two companies that are out there battling for it. You got another one in. So I think being involved in an industry is not just going out and gobbling up market share. It's also creating new capacity and new blood into this field. And I'm very optimistic, we both are, that the advancement of the industry as a whole, and I think it's becoming more and more accepted as a really high quality, affordable housing solution, which it is and is desperately needed, obviously. And we've got operators like yourself, like others, who are very astute real estate professionals who care about their communities, are investing in their communities. That happens all over the place. And that story needs to be told to more underwriting companies. So we're not taking one or two insurance companies in battle. We're taking 5. And again, that's all good for everybody.
I think, Todd, you hit a major pain point here, because there are few options in the MHC space, right? So you're going to look at just a few carriers, or at least there's more options now, but if there's limited options, you can only go around that, you can only go around that merry-go-round for so long until people either know, hey, we didn't insure this, we didn't insure that. Now you're captivated, and you're kind of stuck paying whatever premium they're offering if you need to have that coverage, which then you've got to force some trade-offs. And you mentioned something before that I wanted to go back to a little bit, which was, about allocating for your premium, right? And I think there's a couple of different levers that people need to look at, right? One is, do you advise people like, look, you're going to probably cover based on your community size, you're probably to cover X, right? So that's number one, reserve for that, and make sure you have that in on the sideline, because something is going to happen eventually, and you don't want to go for a $10,000 claim, waste time. Do you do that? Do you look at that as a metric that people should use, or do you, in that process when people are first coming to you, do you suggest, hey, we've got this issue, and then secondarily, like, what about any stick houses that might be on, or other buildings that might be on site, which I've seen drive premiums as well, right?
Well, a big piece, Frank, that we've realized, and this is pretty consistent across a lot of industries, but there's a lack of accuracy too, and I think that's a big piece that Todd and I try to have at the forefront of our conversation. Is one, let's make sure that we're looking at everything accurately. Frank, I can't tell you how many times my clients are looking at acquiring a new community, and they see a policy that the seller had. And they see that seller, is spending $20,000 on insurance. So that's the number that they have in their budget. I'm going to build in 20 grand for insurance because I thought that's what the seller was paying. But what we realize a lot of times is we start digging in that policy, and then we find out that the policy didn't have the new clubhouse added to it that was built in 2022, or it was over-insuring the lagoon and the septic system that they put in a few years ago, and they no longer need $500,000 of coverage on that. So accuracy is a huge component of where I think Todd and I find success. And sometimes it's grueling and sometimes it's painful, but knowing exactly what's going on with that community is imperative, right? So understanding, when was a clubhouse built? Have you had any roof replacements? Have you done any, plumbing replacements or enhancements across the community? Is it on city water, or do you have your own septic system there? All of those things are vital. And without us confirming, the market is left to assume on a lot of those. So the first thing that we try to do is make sure that we have a 100% understanding of the makeup of the community. How many pads is it? How many of those pads are rentals? How many homes are owned by tenants? Again, how is the water and the septic set up? When's the last time the roads were paved? When's the last time that the storage building was re-roofed? And that's the granular part of our process. But again, that is so imperative, because when we couple that with a strong, compelling story and say, hey, we're not just writing fluff in an email, we have all of this sound data, that is probably the most lethal combination. So, and what I was getting at is, again, I can't tell you how many times we go through a policy and it's inaccurate or it's outdated, right? Communities change and communities grow and they get redeveloped and new developments get added on. And if you don't have, if your insurance partner is not staying in tune with your communities and with your portfolio, you're bound to have stuff slip through. And when stuff slips through, you're either overpaying for things or you're underinsured. And it's a mix that we don't want our clients to ever fall into. So we do quarterly, semi-annually audits with our clients, Frank, and say, hey, have there been any changes? Have you taken any buildings down, added any buildings? When's the last rent increase that was applied? And just making sure that data is crystal clear and accurate, again, helps with that story big time. So just emphasize on that.
I'll tell you, just from a personal experience recently, I mean, we have one property that has a couple of traditional stick-built homes. I mean, smaller 2-bedroom homes, and the insurance the original, quote had us insuring those homes for, I think it was like almost $250,000, which, by the way, they were not worth $250,000, even if I sold them. But, the response was, if heaven, God forbid, something happened and a storm took them out, I'd replace them with a manufactured home at, a fraction of that price.
Exactly.
So why would I insure this for $200,000 when, first of all, the market doesn't support a $200,000 home inside a mobile home park, and then secondly, I could replace it with a manufactured home for a fraction of that. Why couldn't I? And it was, I'm taking credit. It was really my partner Pete who handled that, but he got them to reduce that amount. But it wasn't a simple conversation. I mean, it was sending in comparables, showing the other homes that we brought on site, saying, hey, if this happened, this is what we would do because this is what we've already done.
Yep.
And then we've got that reduction to create that savings. But it still became it was not an easy, one-step process. It was multiple conversations till finally getting the insurance company to say, okay, I'll relent and do this. But that was us being proactive on it. It was, do you have any, I mean, for somebody who's scaling up their business right now, like, guys, what is the one thing that they're really missing? And what is one thing that they really should be looking to do to drive those costs down? If they're really looking at, this is how I can create some additional value in that portfolio, what would be your big thing to do right now?
Yeah, I'll let Todd chime in if I miss anything. But there's a few key things that come to mind for me. One is overall consolidation, and we've hammered on that a few times. But as the portfolio is growing and as new communities are going on, a lot of times it makes sense to hit pause and say, hey, is there a better solution now that we have doubled our community size over the last year? So consolidating is key. Law of large numbers, economies of scale, benefits operators extensively. If you have 10 communities in your portfolio and you have all 10 of those on individual policies versus a master offering, you're going to be spending a lot more money on your insurance. You're probably going to have weaker coverage. And then not to mention the back end, the costs that you're bleeding on ROI from administrative work and things like that. So consolidation is so key. Consolidating where you can, getting uniform offerings in one carrier to insure chunks of your business where they can. Two, another high dollar cost point that we see operators is around the inventory. Now, most operators want to target communities that have, sub 20% park owned homes and less than 20% of the homes are rentals. But we know that those options are coming fewer and far between because everybody wants to buy those communities. So what we're seeing is we're now having our clients and our operator base are entertaining portfolios with a heavier rental inventory than we've seen in the past. And rental inventory carries a cost. There are unique ways to insure that inventory. And I would encourage operators that carry any type of significant park-owned home rentals or new sale inventories to really challenge their current broker or the market to make sure that is set up the best way possible. We have seen carriers offer things like blanket wording for inventory or blanket style coverages that, again, benefit the operator on the front end, but immensely on the back end too, when it comes to administrative tasks, reporting, sending in, home files and pulling reports out of Rent Manager, Manage America, and getting them back to the carriers. There's ways to streamline the administrative tasks on the back end that we see delivers a direct ROI to operators. And every dollar we know is so important on these communities. So if we can somehow drive back, $10, $15, $20,000 of value through insurance, we've seen that have a significant impact on the valuation of the communities. So I think consolidation is my biggest one. I think effectively managing your inventory is very, very important. And 3, from a bias standpoint, working with a broker that understands the business. Tartan's not the only one in the business that does it. There's brokers that are well-versed in manufactured housing, but this is not, you wouldn't hire the roofer to build your fence too, just because he's over there doing it. And I think that sometimes is what we see MHC operators say, well, they know real estate, they know commercial, but MHC is unique and it's nuanced with the inventory, with the rentals, with the way these communities are acquired and sold. So number 3 would be partnering with somebody that knows the business. It can increase, just the value of your conversations and the long-term planning of your portfolio can be in a much different spot if you're working with somebody that really understands manufactured housing. TP, anything that you would add in there that would help? Again, the premise is where can these operators maybe drive their costs or put themselves in a better spot for insurance?
Yeah, you nailed it, obviously, and I would add one thing to that, and it's tedious, but especially as someone that's starting and scaling out, don't underestimate the power of data. So don't ignore data. Obviously, I think this goes back to working with some of the agencies out there that really understand the space, because they're going to guide you on what data is important. But keeping good, clean records is a massive help in negotiating in the marketplace. And if you work with someone that knows what they're doing, they know what to filter in and what to filter out, how to create the presentation that is going to be most accepted in the market. But it's tedious on the front end. But just slapping together an application and saying, hey, here's our properties and here's our general annual rents is going to get you the same response back. It's like going to the doctor and you're not telling them everything about you. You're just saying, hey, it hurts here. They're going to prescribe something for that, but they may not know the holistic situation. And so I think keeping good, clean records on all of the communities and solid data will be a massive help in the negotiation process on your annual renewals.
Yeah, that's a great point. And making sure your leases, and if anyone's listening, that your leases are up to date and with that requirement, and then tracking your residents, getting out a communication system with them to at least that they know that they should be insured.
Explore some of those options, Frank. Some of those options even offer revenue driving capabilities back to the operator too. So, some of those companies that will manage that tenant insurance experience, there are revenue verticals that can be tied to that too. So you can really kill 2 birds with one stone as an operator if you take that step and really decide to try to mitigate and reduce your exposure. Not only are you getting more of your tenant-based insured, but there's also revenue that can stem from that. Again, not the reason why operators do it, but a nice cherry on top for everything else that they're putting in.
We could spend a lot of time drilling down on this, because it is such a long, it's that line item where you look, when you're looking at the underwriting and you're saying, well, you say to yourself, what can I really do to move this? It's fun to look at how I could create value or generate revenue,
right,
or other expenses. And then insurance is that one place where you look at, and it's almost out. A lot of it seems out of the operator's control. But from talking with you, there's a lot of different tools and techniques that you could do, where if you can create that 8 to 10% savings across the board, that can have a huge impact on valuation and exit. So if somebody wanted more information on, find out a couple of, I'm sure you have more tips and tricks or ways they should look at their portfolio. What's the best way to reach you guys? How would they contact you to get more information on that?
Yeah, thank you, Frank. So tartaninsurancepartners.com is our website. We'll make sure that obviously that information is shared. Todd and I are both really active on LinkedIn too. Our emails are easy to track down. So dkirby@tartanins.com and tpearsol@tartanins.com. And we like to roll up our sleeves and get involved. And the one thing I like to mention too is if our clients a lot of times are just bouncing stuff off us very early in due diligence. Like, hey, I'm sniffing around a set of communities in, Panhandle, Florida. What can you give me? What kind of scope can you give me? And we'll work and help and try to get involved as early on as possible of that process. Again, just to be a resource for our clients. So those were the emails. Again, tartaninsurancepartners.com. And we're all over. Todd and I are pretty active on LinkedIn. But we answer the phone too. So you can call us and we'll answer the phone. We love having conversations with MHC operators, and not just operators either, Frank. We work with transport companies and retailers and the whole nine, where we like to think that we have a very rounded understanding of the business and would love to talk and help anybody associated with it that we can.
That was great. Thank you, guys. Todd, Dillon, thank you so much for being on the episode today. And I have one question for everybody out there who's listening. If you found value in this episode, give us a rating on whatever streaming platform that you're listening to this program on. And for doing that, and if you send that rating into the MHP Exchange, we're going to send you a free copy of our after site visit report, which is the same report our team executes down on the ground and ensures that we're following through on the business plan for any of the communities we own. Until next time, everyone, happy investing.